7 Days in Paradise Part 8. Chapter 22, The Grand Gesture. The last night aboard Euphoria unfolded like something too beautiful to be real. The ocean had gone glass still, the air soft and heavy with warmth. The sky was the kind of blue that seemed to melt into gold near the horizon, the clouds fading from coral to rose. The day had been long but easy, hours spent drifting along the coast, no interviews, no calls, no news updates. For the first time in months, Claire and Max were alone with silence that didn't feel empty. Now, as the sun began to sink, Euphoria was anchored a few miles off the coast, where the water deepened to an endless shade of cobalt. The island shimmered faintly in the distance, a dark silhouette against the glow. Claire stood on the upper deck, barefoot again, a soft white dress billowing gently around her legs. The wind tugged at her hair, and for once, she didn't care if it tangled. The light touched her face, painting it gold. Down below, she could hear faint music, a slow, instrumental melody floating up through hidden speakers. Max had disappeared half an hour ago, muttering something about a quick call, but the look in his eyes told her it wasn't business. She smiled to herself. Of course he's planning something. The man didn't know how to sit still. When Max appeared again, the sun had just begun its final descent. He was barefoot too, shirt sleeves rolled up, hair ruffled by the sea breeze. In his hand, he carried something small, a box, but she couldn't see it clearly yet. He stopped a few feet away, the wind catching the edge of his shirt, and smiled at her in that quiet, knowing way he did when he was trying to memorize a moment. "You always find me at sunset," she said softly. "Maybe that's the only time you stop running," he teased. She laughed, shaking her head. "Careful, that almost sounded poetic." "Almost," he said. "I'll keep working on it." He walked closer, the teakwood deck warm under his feet. The air between them was full of salt and something electric. "Do you know," he said, "when I bought this yacht, I thought I was buying freedom." She smiled faintly. "And I was wrong," he said simply. "Turns out, all I bought was space. Beautiful, empty space." "Max, let me finish," he said gently. "I thought I liked the quiet. The control. But then you showed up, talking too fast, over-planning everything, turning my entire world into noise. And somehow, that's when everything started to make sense again." Her eyes softened. "You really should have stuck with the poetic line." He grinned, then took a breath. "Maybe this will do better." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the small velvet box she'd only glimpsed before. For a heartbeat, she didn't process what she was seeing. Then he dropped to one knee. The world seemed to stop. The sound of the waves faded. The faint hum of the engines disappeared. All that remained was the sunset burning low over the horizon and Max Darcy, kneeling before her, holding the kind of question that could change the shape of everything. Claire's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide, heart hammering in her chest. "Max." He looked up at her, calm, steady, a flicker of emotion glinting in his eyes. "I know we've been through a storm, literally and otherwise," he said quietly. "And I know you didn't come here looking for this. But I also know I've never been more sure of anything in my life." She shook her head, half laughing, half crying already. "You're serious?" "Completely," he said. "I'm not asking for forever right now. I'm asking for next. Whatever comes next, whatever this becomes, let's build it together." Her breath caught. "I want the noise," he said softly. "I want the mess, the laughter, the arguments about schedules, the mornings where we forget who's supposed to be in charge. I want the real thing. The box in his hand opened. Inside, the ring caught the dying sunlight and scattered it back in a dozen small sparks, delicate, understated, a single flawless diamond on a thin band of gold. It wasn't the flashiest thing he could have bought. It was the one that looked like it belonged on her hand. She stared at it, her throat tightening. "Max, this is insane," she whispered, tears catching in her lashes. "I know," he said. "That's what makes it perfect." The silence between them was thick, trembling. The wind picked up, brushing her hair across her face. He reached up and tucked it gently behind her ear. "Say yes," he murmured. "Not because it's the easy thing. Because it's the right one." She laughed through her tears, shaking her head as if trying to keep herself from completely falling apart. "You never stop surprising me." "Good," he said softly. "Then I'm doing it right." She looked at him, really looked. The man who had been her unexpected roommate, her rescuer, her headache, her anchor. The man who had risked everything to make sure she could breathe again. And in that moment, surrounded by nothing but ocean and sky, she knew the answer wasn't complicated. It had been growing inside her all along. She dropped to her knees too, right there in front of him, laughing and crying all at once. "Yes," she whispered. Then, louder, surer, "Yes." His smile broke open, wide and disbelieving. "Yeah. Yeah," she said, tears spilling freely now. "Yes, maximum. Of course yes." He stood, pulling her up with him in one smooth motion, and before either of them could think, he kissed her. It wasn't the careful kind this time. It was the kind that felt like a promise sealed in salt air and sunlight. Behind them, the first firework exploded, unexpected, sudden, dazzling against the twilight sky. Then another. And another. She pulled back, eyes wide, laughing breathlessly. "You planned this?" He looked just as stunned. "I didn't, well, not exactly. I may have mentioned something about a surprise. Guess the crew took it seriously." The fireworks bloomed over the ocean, bright and wild, painting the surface of the water in reds, blues, golds. The reflections rippled across the deck, wrapping them both in color. She leaned against him, her head resting against his chest, the rhythm of his heartbeat steady under her ear. "See," he murmured. "No cameras. No crowd. Just us." She smiled, eyes glistening. "Just us." They stood there in the soft explosion of light, the ocean glittering around them, the air thick with salt and smoke and something like forever. For the first time since either of them could remember, there was no noise left to run from. Just laughter. Tears. And a promise whispered into the wind, that whatever storms came next, they'd face them together. And as the last firework burst into a shower of gold above the horizon, Claire looked up at Max, still holding her hand, and thought that maybe paradise wasn't a place at all. It was this. A heartbeat. A yes. A beginning dressed as an ending. Chapter 23, 1 week later. 1 week later, the world woke up to the kind of headline that makes people drop their morning coffee. Max Darcy marries Claire Beaumont in the most extravagant wedding of the year. It was everywhere, from New York tabloids to London business journals to quiet lifestyle magazines that pretended not to care about gossip. The words "Euphoria wedding" were trending globally before breakfast. By noon, half the planet had seen the photos, the billionaire and the wedding planner who'd survived a storm, a scandal, and somehow turned it all into a love story for the ages. The headline didn't exaggerate. The wedding really was the event of the year. Euphoria, once sleek and understated, had been transformed into something else entirely, a floating palace anchored in the sapphire waters off Maui. The ship's decks were draped in white orchids and golden silk, chandeliers strung along the railings like stars trapped in crystal. It glittered under the Hawaiian sun, its reflection scattering across the ocean in flashes of gold and silver. Every surface gleamed. Every flower looked as if it had been grown under command. The guest list was the kind that made journalists lose their composure: CEOs, actors, royalty, designers, old friends from Claire's world, new allies from Max's. A-list and elite, flown in on private jets and escorted by discreet tenders to the yacht that had somehow become legend. But amidst the glitz, something was unmistakably intimate, deliberate. Because for all the grandeur, this wasn't a spectacle. Not really. It was a promise sealed in the place where it had all started, surrounded by ocean, with no walls left between them and the world. That morning, the sky had been perfect, a soft, endless blue dusted with high clouds that moved like brush strokes. The sea shimmered calm and warm. Below deck, in one of Euphoria's suites, Claire stood before a full-length mirror, her reflection bathed in sunlight. Her dress, custom, couture, breathtaking, looked like it had been sewn from moonlight. A million hand-stitched beads caught the light in waves. The neckline dipped delicately, the sleeves sheer, the skirt cascading into a train that shimmered like water itself. The veil was gossamer thin, edged with gold thread. It was said to have cost over $1 million. To Claire, it was priceless for another reason entirely: it fit like a second skin, not because of the measurements, but because it felt like the life she'd finally stepped into willingly. Her makeup was soft, dewy skin, faint rose lips, eyes lined just enough to catch the light. Her hair was swept back in an elegant twist, loose strands framing her face. No tiara. No diamonds on her neck. Just a single white orchid pinned behind her ear. Her assistant, flown in from Los Angeles, stood teary-eyed by the doorway. "You're trending in 30 countries already," she whispered. Claire smiled faintly, eyes still on her reflection. "Let them watch. I'm not hiding anymore." On the main deck, the aisle had been built from glass panels stretched across the pool, making it look as though she'd be walking on water. Rows of guests sat beneath a canopy of floating flowers and fairy lights. At the end of that aisle stood Maximum. He wore a perfectly tailored white suit, his usual relaxed ease sharpened by something unmistakably tender. He looked both powerful and human, the sunlight turning his dark hair almost gold. When he saw her appear at the edge of the deck, the rest of the world seemed to fade: the guests, the music, the cameras hidden discreetly among the decker. Just her. Just him. For a moment, even the ocean seemed to still. The ceremony was short, elegant, deeply personal. The officiant, an old friend of Max's, spoke with a voice that carried easily over the soft rush of the sea. When Claire reached him, Max reached for her hand without hesitation. His thumb brushed her wrist, grounding her instantly. He whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "You sure this isn't all a dream?" She smiled through the tightness in her throat. "If it is, don't wake me." The guests laughed softly as if they could feel the gravity between them. The vows they exchanged weren't rehearsed. They didn't need to be. "I thought I built my life out of control," Max said quietly, his voice carrying over the deck. "But then you walked into it, loud, complicated, unstoppable, and taught me that the best things are the ones you don't plan for." She laughed softly, eyes glistening. When it was her turn, she looked up at him, her voice trembling but sure. You showed me that not every storm means destruction. Some are just clearing the sky for something new. The wind lifted her veil just slightly, catching the light like a halo. When they finally said I do, the sound of applause and cheers rolled over the water. Somewhere in the distance, a burst of fireworks cracked open the sky, not part of the schedule, but perfectly timed. And just like that, the island's most unlikely couple became its most unforgettable. The reception was a spectacle of pure decadence. A live orchestra played on the upper deck. Tables shimmered under crystal and gold, surrounded by flowers that smelled like paradise itself. Champagne flowed, waiters moved like dancers, and guests couldn't stop talking, not about the food, not about the decor, but about the feeling of it all. It didn't feel like a billionaire's performance. It felt like joy. Halfway through the evening, when the sun had completely set and the ocean turned to black glass, Max stood and raised a glass. To the woman who made me believe in beginnings, he said simply. The crowd toasted, laughter and music swelling like a wave. Far from the noise, on the topmost deck, Claire leaned against the railing, her veil gone, her hair loose now, the moonlight tracing her face. The party glowed below like another world, warm, golden, alive. She heard footsteps and turned. Max was there, no jacket now, shirt sleeves rolled, the tie undone. He looked at her like he was still surprised she was real. You're missing your own party, she said softly. So are you, he replied. I needed air. He came up beside her, hands resting on the railing. Too much noise. She smiled. No. Just, too much of everything. He nodded. That's fair. Though, for the record, you handle everything pretty well. They stood in silence for a moment, looking out at the horizon. The water was calm again, glowing with the reflection of 1,000 lights from the yacht. I used to think weddings were a show, she said finally. A way for people to prove something. And this one? She looked at him, her eyes soft. This one feels like home. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Good. Because I built it that way. She laughed quietly. You can't help yourself, can you? No, he said. Not when it comes to you. Down below, another round of fireworks erupted over the water, this time planned, grand, and breathtaking. The colors spread across the waves, turning everything beneath them into gold and crimson. From the shore, people stopped what they were doing to look out over the water, phones in hand, their faces lit by the glow. The world gasped again, as it always did when Max Darcy made a move. But up there, on the top deck of Euphoria, none of that existed. It was just them, barefoot, laughing, wrapped in sea breeze and fireworks, a billionaire and a planner who had found each other in the chaos and somehow turned it into peace. As the lights shimmered over the water, Claire looked at him and whispered, you know, I think this might be the first wedding I've ever planned that actually went right. Max grinned. That's because this time, you weren't working. She laughed, and he leaned in, kissing her softly under the fading glow of the fireworks. And somewhere deep in the quiet between the ocean and the stars, Euphoria swayed gently, a floating palace, a symbol, and a promise. The world might have seen extravagance. But for them, it was simple. It was love. It was home. And it was finally theirs. Chapter 24, The Wedding of the Century. The world had been whispering about it for days, the wedding of the century, the one that had turned every camera, every lens, every headline toward the middle of the Pacific. But when the moment finally arrived, it was somehow even more breathtaking than anyone had imagined. The day began with sunlight spilling like liquid gold across the deck of Euphoria. The yacht gleamed in the morning light, polished to perfection, its reflection shimmering across the turquoise water. From above, it looked almost unreal, a floating island of white and gold surrounded by deep blue infinity. By mid-morning, the air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Helicopters hovered discreetly at a distance, zoom lenses glinting. Every major publication had a correspondent somewhere within range. Paparazzi boats drifted far enough not to be intrusive, close enough to capture the impossible glamour of it all. Inside the yacht, the scene was pure opulence. Florists from Paris and Tokyo worked in perfect coordination, creating walls of white orchids, roses, and plumeria that filled the air with a fragrance so soft and heady it felt almost like a dream. Every rail, every stair, every surface bloomed. The aisle ran the full length of the upper deck, glass beneath the feet, so the bride would appear to walk on air above the sea. At the end stood a floral arch so extravagant it seemed to glow, woven with thousands of tiny crystal lights hidden among the petals. It wasn't decoration anymore, it was architecture, sculpture, art. Every chair was wrapped in silk, every glass trimmed with gold leaf. The harpist warmed up quietly in the corner, her fingers brushing the strings like a whisper. And then there was Claire. Her suite had become a cocoon of chaos, stylists, designers, photographers, all orbiting around her. But Claire herself was calm. Steady. A woman who had walked through fire and now stood in its light. Her gown was unlike anything she'd ever imagined, a masterpiece custom-made by one of Europe's most elusive designers. It had taken 2 months of secret fittings and nearly 1,000 hours of handwork. Valued at over $1 million, it was more than a dress. It was a story written in silk. The bodice was embroidered with tiny crystals, each one catching the light as she moved. The skirt flowed like liquid pearl, each layer whispering against the next. The train spilled across the floor, long enough to rival any royal procession, yet weightless enough that it floated behind her like mist. Her veil was cathedral length, soft as breath, edged with delicate gold thread. And at her ears, 2 diamond drops shaped like teardrops, a gift from Max, rumored to be worth as much as a small villa. When her stylist stepped back, hands trembling slightly, she whispered, "You look unreal." Claire turned toward the mirror and took a long, slow breath. "No," she said softly, almost to herself. "I finally look real." Outside, the world glittered. A-list guests from every corner of the globe had arrived, Hollywood royalty, tech billionaires, designers, musicians, even a few discreet political faces. The guest list read like an impossible dream, names whispered in corners, outfits photographed from every angle. Champagne, real French vintage, poured from diamond-crusted bottles, flowed like water. The air hummed with conversation and awe. Everyone had seen luxury before, but this was something else entirely, too elegant to be ostentatious, too perfect to be showy. When the orchestra began to play, a hush rippled through the crowd. The strings wove a soft, slow version of Can't Help Falling in Love. The guests rose to their feet. And then she appeared. Claire stepped onto the glass aisle, her train catching the sun. For one impossible moment, she did look like she was walking on water. The gown shimmered, the light kissed her veil, and every head turned as though the world itself had tilted toward her. At the far end, Max Darcy stood waiting beneath the glowing floral arch, wearing a white tuxedo cut so precisely it looked sculpted. His tie was silk, his cufflinks simple platinum. No flash, no overstatement, he didn't need it. His expression said everything. When he saw her, something in his composure faltered, just slightly. The kind of break that only love could cause. She met his gaze and smiled, small but radiant, her steps slow and sure. As she reached him, the sea wind lifted her veil. He reached up gently, fingers brushing her cheek as he drew it back, eyes soft, unguarded. "You're late," he murmured. She laughed, quiet and breathless. "You were worth it." The officiant, a family friend flown in from London, waited for the quiet to settle. "We are gathered here," he began, "on the edge of the world, where sea meets sky, to witness something both simple and extraordinary." The ceremony unfolded like a dream. The air was thick with flowers and sunlight, the ocean stretching endless behind them. Max's vows were short, honest, unpolished in the best way. "I used to think success was about control," he said, voice low but steady. "About never letting the world see a crack. Then you came along, with your checklists, your chaos, your heart, and I realized real strength isn't in control. It's in trust." Claire's eyes filled instantly. Her vows came next. "I thought I knew what love was," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought it was neat, safe, predictable. But then you showed me it's supposed to undo you a little, and then rebuild you better. I don't want safe anymore. I want real." He smiled, blinking back emotion. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, as if on cue, the first firework exploded above them. Heart-shaped. It burst into brilliant gold against the blue, mirrored by 1,000 tiny reflections in the waves below. Then another. And another. Reds, silvers, pinks, each one blooming into hearts, intertwining in the sky until the entire horizon pulsed with light. The crowd erupted in applause, some cheering, some wiping tears discreetly. Max pulled Claire close, kissed her with the kind of certainty that silenced everything, the cameras, the whispers, even the ocean for a beat. When they finally pulled apart, the fireworks still danced overhead, and the air smelled faintly of salt and champagne. He whispered, "Mrs. Darcy." She smiled through her tears. "Took you long enough." Later, as twilight deepened and the party glittered to life, the world continued to watch from afar. Photos from Euphoria flooded every feed, the gown, the fireworks, the laughter. But the pictures didn't capture everything. They couldn't capture how Max kept glancing at her like he still couldn't believe she was real. Or how Claire would reach for his hand every few minutes, as though to make sure he was still there. Or how the ocean, endless and quiet beneath the lights, seemed to whisper a secret only they could hear. The world saw extravagance. They lived simplicity dressed as luxury. Because under all the diamonds, the cameras, the heart-shaped fireworks, it was still just two people who had met by accident in paradise, and chosen, against every odd, to stay. Chapter 25, Happily Ever After, for now. The night had fallen soft and wide, wrapping the ocean in velvet. Euphoria glided through the Pacific like a ghost of light, its hull aglow with golden reflections, its wake cutting a quiet, silvery path through the calm water. The wedding of the century had ended hours ago, but the island still shimmered faintly in the distance, the last of the fireworks drifting into memory. The guests had been ferried back to their resorts and villas, the orchestra had packed up, and the laughter and clinking glasses had faded into the hum of the sea. All that remained now was the sound of water against steel, the whisper of wind through the sails, and the occasional low murmur of the engines beneath their feet. Max and Claire were alone on the top deck. The chaos was over, the cameras, the applause, the spectacle. The world was still watching, of course, the headlines were already circling the globe. But here, in the quiet between one day and the next, it didn't matter. She sat beside him on the long cushioned bench near the bow, still in her gown, or what was left of it. The elaborate train and veil were gone, the intricate skirt folded beside her in a loose heap of silk. Barefoot now, her toes brushed against the warm deck as the wind tangled her hair. He'd shed his tuxedo jacket and loosened his tie, his shirt open at the collar, the sea breeze teasing it against his chest. The light from the water painted his face in soft ripples of blue and gold. For a long while, neither spoke. They just listened, to the rhythm of the waves, to the creak of the yacht, to the quiet peace that had finally found them after so much noise. Claire tilted her head back, looking up at the sky. "It's funny," she said softly. "There's so much light out here, but somehow the stars still show through." Max followed her gaze. "They always do. You just have to be far enough from everything else to see them." She smiled faintly, eyes half closed. "I don't think I've been far from everything else in a long time." "You're far enough now." She turned her head, studying him. His face was calm, but there was a softness in it she hadn't seen before, the kind that comes only when someone finally lets their guard down. "You did it," she said quietly. "You pulled off a wedding that even you couldn't outdo." He chuckled under his breath. "Don't tempt me." She laughed, tired, content, the kind of laugh that belongs to someone who no longer has to perform. "Admit it. You enjoyed it more than you thought you would." He looked out toward the horizon, where the last traces of Maui's coastline had melted into darkness. "I did. But not for the reasons anyone thinks." "Then for what?" He turned back to her, eyes steady. "Because for once, it wasn't about proving anything. It was just us." Her lips curved in a slow, genuine smile. "The two people who met because of a hotel booking mistake." He grinned. "Best clerical error of my life." She laughed again, leaning into his shoulder. The movement was so natural now, no hesitation, no self-consciousness. Just comfort. The yacht sailed on, smooth and unhurried. The crew kept their respectful distance, giving the newlyweds the privacy they deserved. Far below, the wake shimmered faintly like a ribbon of light trailing behind them. Claire's voice was quiet when she spoke again. 7 days. Max tilted his head slightly. "What about them?" She traced the outline of his hand with her fingers. "That's all it took. 7 days to turn my whole life upside down." He smiled, his tone half teasing, half tender. "Upside down's a good direction sometimes." "I was so sure of everything before," she said. "My career, my fiancé, my plans, everything had a schedule, an order. And then you showed up, barefoot and impossible." "I was perfectly reasonable," he said with mock offense. She nudged him gently. "You were chaos." "Controlled chaos," he said. She laughed softly. "You don't get to rebrand it." He leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You didn't seem to mind in the end." "I didn't," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You taught me how to stop planning and just live." The words lingered between them, carried off by the wind. Below them, the sea shimmered black and endless, dotted with flecks of light from the yacht's reflection. The moon hung low, fat and golden, so close it almost looked touchable. After a while, Claire said, "Do you think people will believe it?" "The wedding?" he asked. She smiled. "The story." That all of this really happened. That two people got stranded on an island, fought like enemies, fell in love, and somehow ended up here. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "They'll believe it because they want to. People need stories that end like this, ones that remind them life can surprise you." She rested her head against his shoulder again. "And what about us? Do we get an ending?" He looked down at her, his hand resting lightly over hers. "I don't think this is an ending." Her eyes lifted to meet his. "No." He shook his head slowly. "I think this is just where the next part starts." She smiled, her gaze soft and full of quiet understanding. "You sound like someone who finally believes in forever." "I don't," he said simply. "I believe in right now. And right now, this feels like forever." That made her laugh, quiet, breathy, real. She pressed closer, fitting against him like she'd always belonged there. For a long time, neither said anything. The sea whispered, the engines hummed, and the yacht sailed toward the open horizon. The glow from Maui faded completely, leaving only stars and moonlight. After a while, Claire murmured, half asleep, 7 days changed everything. Max smiled, his voice low and warm. "Good thing we got stranded." She smiled against his shoulder, eyes closing, the salt air brushing her skin. And as euphoria sailed deeper into the night, two shadows against the vast, glittering sea, the world's headlines were already calling it the love story that conquered paradise. But for them, there were no headlines, no cameras, no noise. Just the ocean. The stars. And a love that had started by accident. And somehow found its way home. The sea stretched endlessly before them, a promise written in motion, in light, in trust. And somewhere far behind, on the island where it all began, the waves kept whispering the same quiet truth: some stories aren't planned. They just happen, perfectly, wildly, beautifully, when you least expect them.
Thanks for listening to Billionaire Romance Stories, where love meets luxury in the most unexpected places. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. We love hearing your favorite twists and favorite theories. And don't forget to ring that bell, because in this world of yachts, secrets, and luxurious romance, the next story is always one click away.